In the vast theater of our modern world, beneath the hum of machines and the glitter of technology, lies a silent war, not of soldiers and tanks, but of elements forged deep within the earth. Lithium, cobalt, nickel, the lifeblood of progress, now form the front lines of a new global struggle. And at the heart of it stands one nation, quietly reshaping destiny through the power of minerals. This is not a tale of conquest by force, but by foresight, patience, and precision. This is the story of how China's mastery of the mineral world may have finally cornered America in a battle unseen, yet profoundly decisive for the future of civilization. In the unfolding story of human progress, wars have evolved beyond the clash of steel and smoke. In earlier centuries, nations fought for land, for gold, for oil. But in the modern era, a quieter, more profound conflict is underway, one fought not across open battlefields, but deep beneath the crust of our planet. It is the war for minerals, the elemental building blocks upon which the future stands. As humanity races towards electrification, renewable energy, and advanced technologies, the demand for resources like lithium, nickel, cobalt, and rare earth elements has surged with unprecedented force. These minerals, once obscure to all but a few geologists and chemists, now define the course of nations, determining which societies rise and which falter in the global order. The 21st century has become the age of technological transformation, where electric vehicles, batteries, smartphones, and renewable grids symbolize not just progress, but survival. Yet, behind these shining icons of innovation lies an invisible foundation of raw materials. Without lithium, the electric revolution halts. Without cobalt and nickel, batteries remain lifeless shells. Without rare earths, the screens, magnets, and defense technologies that drive the modern world simply cease to function. Every satellite orbiting Earth, every smartphone connecting billions, every wind turbine spinning in the open plains, all rely on the same finite veins of the planet's mineral wealth. And it is here, in this silent and often ignored battlefield, that the new global struggle takes form. Unlike oil, whose extraction and trade are visible and politically explosive, the mineral supply chain is a complex, deeply entangled web stretching across continents. The true power lies not merely in possession, but in control over extraction, refining, logistics, and markets. This control determines who commands the pace of innovation and who remains dependent. It decides whether a nation can sustain its industries or find itself vulnerable to the will of another. As nations push toward cleaner energy and digital futures, the balance of mineral control has become the deciding factor of economic and technological sovereignty. While Western powers focus their gaze on finance, software, and defense, another player, patient, deliberate, and strategic, turned its attention underground. In this unseen war for minerals, China recognized something others overlooked: that the real weapons of the future are not missiles or algorithms, but the very elements that make those technologies possible. By investing in the earth itself, by forging alliances with resource-rich regions and mastering refining technologies, China positioned itself not merely as a participant, but as the central orchestrator of the mineral age. The unseen war is not defined by aggression but by acquisition, not by conquest but by control. Corporations and governments alike are caught within its intricate web, where contracts replace cannons and shipments of lithium replace bullets. In this new struggle, power is measured not by armies, but by access, the ability to sustain industries, to power cities, to shape the rhythm of global development. It is a war fought in boardrooms, laboratories, and remote mining towns, a conflict of strategy rather than violence, of foresight rather than force. Across deserts, mountains, and oceans, nations scramble for what remains of the Earth's mineral bounty. The world's dependence on these materials grows with every electric car produced and every data center powered. Yet only a few understand the magnitude of what is unfolding. Beneath the surface of progress, a quiet contest defines the destiny of nations, reshaping global alliances and exposing the vulnerabilities of even the mightiest powers. This is the unseen war for minerals, the hidden struggle that will determine who leads, who follows, and who fades into history. Long before the world began to grasp the magnitude of the coming resource race, China had already started laying the foundations for dominance. It was a move not born of chance, but of vision, a deep understanding that the true power of the future would not be measured by military might or economic rhetoric, but by control over the materials that fuel progress itself. Decades ago, when most nations were still fixated on oil reserves and industrial exports, China quietly turned its gaze to the Earth's hidden treasures, to the minerals buried deep beneath deserts, mountains, and foreign soils. It saw in these elements the seeds of an empire not defined by conquest, but by capability. China's early leaders recognized that the global economy was shifting toward technology, and that technology would increasingly depend on resources invisible to the untrained eye. While others dismissed rare earths, lithium, and cobalt as niche commodities, China saw them as the new currency of global power. It began investing not only in mining, but in the entire ecosystem surrounding these materials, refining, processing, logistics, and trade infrastructure. The nation understood that owning the mines was not enough. The real advantage would come from mastering every step between raw extraction and finished product. That foresight allowed China to build an industrial chain so integrated and efficient that within decades it became nearly impossible for others to compete. Throughout the 1992 and early 2000s, while Western powers focused on software, financial markets, and consumer technology, China embarked on a silent revolution beneath the surface. It began acquiring stakes in mines across Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia, often through long-term contracts that appeared routine but carried profound strategic weight. Simultaneously, it poured resources into domestic refining capacity, understanding that the bottleneck in global supply would not be in mining itself, but in the complex and costly process of turning raw minerals into usable industrial inputs. As a result, even when other nations extracted materials from their own lands, they often found themselves sending those same materials to China for processing. This was not a coincidence, but a carefully orchestrated design. China saw what others did not, that the future's greatest leverage would come from interdependence. By controlling the refining process, it made the world reliant on its output. By dominating rare earth production, it gained silent influence over industries ranging from renewable energy to military defense. By securing the flow of lithium and cobalt, it placed itself at the center of the Green Revolution long before the term became fashionable. These moves were not loud or boastful. They were methodical, deliberate, and rooted in a long-term vision that valued patience over immediate profit. When Western analysts finally turned their attention to the mineral markets, they found themselves facing an empire already established. China had become the undisputed leader in rare earth refining, lithium processing, and battery production, the critical pillars of modern innovation. Its state-owned enterprises and private firms held partnerships and concessions in resource-rich regions across first continents, from the copper belts of Africa to the lithium fields of South America. What appeared to many as simple trade relationships were, in reality, the framework of a new kind of geopolitical power, one not enforced through dominance, but through necessity. The brilliance of China's early vision lay in its timing. It moved before the rush, investing when resources were cheap and competition scarce. It studied not just geology but economics, politics, and global trends, predicting how the world's transition to cleaner energy and digital technology would make certain materials indispensable. By the time other nations realized the strategic value of minerals, China had already built the networks, infrastructure, and alliances to ensure its supremacy. Its early investments became the keystones of a future that the rest of the world would eventually depend upon. For decades, America believed its dominance was unshakable. Its economic power, technological innovation, and military reach seemed to place it permanently at the top of the global hierarchy. Yet beneath the surface of that confidence, a quiet vulnerability was forming, one built not from weakness in ideas or ambition, but from dependence. The United States had grown accustomed to a world in which resources were abundant, markets were open, and global supply chains would always bend to its will. But the 21st century revealed a far different reality. In a world where minerals fuel the engines of progress, America's strength began to rest upon resources it no longer controlled. The illusion of dominance was reinforced by decades of success. America led in technology, industry, and innovation, but it failed to see that the foundation of these achievements, the raw materials that make them possible, was slipping away. When the global economy turned toward renewable energy and digital infrastructure, America found itself trapped in a paradox. It had the genius to invent, the capital to produce, and the markets to consume, yet it lacked control over the very substances that powered its inventions. Every electric vehicle battery, every smartphone chip, every defense system required minerals that were increasingly sourced and refined elsewhere, most notably in China. For years, policymakers dismissed the danger, assuming that market forces would naturally balance supply and demand. But minerals are not governed by simple economics. They are bound by geography, politics, and control. As China invested strategically in mining operations and refining facilities, America chose short-term profit over long-term security. It outsourced production to reduce costs, hollowed out its industrial base, and placed its faith in global supply chains that it no longer directed. This dependency was subtle, almost invisible, until geopolitical tensions began to expose the fragility of the system. When America looked closer, it saw the truth. Over 80% of its rare earth imports came from China. The magnets that powered its fighter jets and the batteries that fueled its cars were tied to foreign processing plants. Even as it spoke of energy independence and innovation, the reality was dependence, a reliance so deep that disrupting it could bring industries to a halt. The nation that once built its strength on self-sufficiency now found its technological and economic heartbeat dependent on a rival power's industrial capacity. This dependency crisis went beyond materials. It revealed a deeper complacency. For too long, America equated leadership with consumption rather than creation. It dominated markets not by producing the base materials of progress, but by designing and marketing the products that used them. China, on the other hand, had built its strategy from the ground up, starting with the earth itself. The result was a reversal of roles, a quiet shifting of power from the consumer of innovation to the controller of its foundation. The illusion of dominance persisted, because America continued to lead in visible ways in software, finance, and culture. But beneath the surface of those achievements, the industrial machinery that sustained them was increasingly foreign. A smartphone designed in California depended on minerals refined in China and mined in Africa. A renewable energy project in Texas required components that passed through Chinese processing plants. Even the defense systems that symbolized American strength contained rare earth elements sourced from the very nation it sought to counterbalance. The deeper truth was that America's economic model had been built on trust in global stability, in open trade, and in the belief that no single nation would ever control the arteries of modern industry. That trust was now eroding. The illusion of unchallenged dominance had blinded it to a reality in which its most powerful rival had already taken command of the very resources that sustained technological civilization. The nation that once dictated the world's industrial rhythm now faced a growing dependency that threatened to rewrite the balance of power. In the global economy, power no longer resides solely in what a nation produces, but in what it controls. The true battlefield of the modern age is not fought with armies or weapons, but through intricate networks of supply chains that stretch across continents. Within this complex web, control over minerals has become the ultimate form of leverage. China understood this earlier than most, and in doing so, it built not just an industrial advantage, but a global trap, one that other nations willingly stepped into, blinded by convenience and cost efficiency. The global supply chain, once hailed as a triumph of free trade and globalization, has become the very structure through which China exerts its quiet dominance. For decades, corporations and governments sought efficiency above all else. Production was outsourced to where labor was cheaper and regulations looser, creating a system optimized for speed and profit. But in that relentless pursuit, the West surrendered control over its industrial backbone. While factories in America and Europe closed, China became the world's manufacturing hub, gradually weaving itself into every layer of global production. What seemed like economic interdependence was, in truth, a slow and calculated consolidation of control. The same pattern emerged with minerals, the unseen lifeblood of technology. By mastering the refining and processing stages, China ensured that even if the raw materials were mined elsewhere, they would still flow through its hands before reaching global markets. This was not mere economic strategy, it was geopolitical architecture. Each mine acquired abroad, each refinery built at home, each logistics route developed through initiatives like the Belt and Road, all were threads in a larger design to make China indispensable. The result was a supply chain trap that left other nations exposed. Even when the West began to recognize its over-reliance, the structure was too deeply embedded to unwind. Rebuilding, refining capacity, or developing new trade routes required years of investment and massive infrastructure time that the world no longer had as the demand for critical minerals soared. China's control extended far beyond the physical flow of materials. It influenced market prices, dictated availability, and shaped industrial policies globally. When rare earth exports were restricted in the past, the shockwaves rippled across economies, revealing just how dependent others had become. It was a demonstration of quiet power, the ability to influence without confrontation. By holding the central node in the mineral chain, China could determine who advances and who stagnates in the race for technology and energy supremacy. The genius of this strategy lies in its subtlety. Rather than confrontation, it relies on cooperation that gradually transforms into dependency. The West, seeking cheap manufacturing and stable supplies, entered willingly into a system it did not control. Every contract signed with a Chinese processor, every component sourced from a Chinese supplier, added another link to the chain. Over time, those links formed a structure too vast to escape from easily. It was economic gravity at its finest, invisible, yet inescapable. Even as America and its allies began speaking of decoupling and reshoring, they found that the very systems that supported their industries were deeply intertwined with China's. From electric vehicle batteries to solar panels, from smartphones to advanced weaponry, the supply chains ran through the same nexus. China had positioned itself as the unavoidable intermediary of progress. To challenge that position would require rebuilding decades of industrial capacity and technological know-how, an undertaking few nations were prepared to begin. The global supply chain trap, therefore, is not a product of aggression but of foresight. It is the result of one nation's understanding that the future would belong not to those who own the resources, but to those who command their movement. Through logistics, refining, and global integration, China transformed the world's dependency into its own strength, turning interconnectedness into influence and efficiency into control. Across the continents of Africa and South America, where the earth is rich with untapped minerals and resources, a quiet transformation has been unfolding. While Western powers often viewed these regions through the narrow lens of aid, debt, or short-term trade, China saw something else entirely: opportunity. It recognized that the future of global influence would be written not only in capitals and corporations, but in the soil beneath these developing nations. Through patience and persistence, China began what can only be described as a campaign of resource diplomacy, one that combined economic partnership with strategic foresight, securing access to the world's most vital mineral reserves without the need for force or domination. In the heart of Africa, where cobalt, copper, and rare earth elements lie buried in abundance, China moved swiftly but subtly. It offered infrastructure where others offered conditions, roads where others offered rhetoric, and investment where others hesitated. Through the promise of development, it forged long-term agreements with governments hungry for progress and stability. Chinese companies, often backed by state financing, began acquiring stakes in mines, ports, and energy projects. These ventures were not isolated transactions. They were part of a meticulously constructed network designed to guarantee China's control over the supply of critical minerals. From the cobalt mines of the Democratic Republic of Congo to the copper belts of Zambia, Chinese presence became synonymous with progress and with influence. In South America, the story echoed the same rhythm but with different minerals. The salt flats of Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile, the so-called lithium triangle, became the new focal point of China's attention. As the world's demand for lithium skyrocketed, driven by electric vehicles and energy storage systems, China had already positioned itself to dominate the next generation of energy technology. Through joint ventures, technology transfers, and infrastructure projects, it secured access to the lithium reserves that the modern world would soon depend upon. While Western corporations debated environmental policies and regulations, Chinese enterprises were already laying pipelines, building refineries, and establishing logistics networks that would feed directly into China's expanding battery industry. This was not mere opportunism but strategic design. China's approach to resource acquisition was guided by long-term planning rather than short-term profit. Every contract signed and every facility built abroad contributed to a larger goal, ensuring that the lifeblood of future technology flowed through Chinese-controlled channels. By investing in roads, railways, and ports, China ensured that the extraction and transportation of these resources remained under its supervision. The Belt and Road Initiative, while often discussed in terms of infrastructure and trade, also served as the logistical backbone for resource movement, connecting mines in Africa and South America to processing plants and factories in Asia. Unlike the exploitative models of the past, China's diplomacy presented itself as partnership. It spoke the language of equality and development, providing what many nations desperately needed: investment without interference. Yet, beneath this cooperative surface lay the reality of strategic dependence. The nations that welcomed Chinese investment found themselves increasingly tied to China's economic orbit. Their exports, infrastructure, and technological development became intertwined with Chinese industries and policies. Over time, these relationships granted China not just access to resources, but influence over political and economic decisions far beyond its borders. What made China's resource diplomacy particularly effective was its adaptability. It did not impose a single model but tailored its engagement to each region's unique context. In some cases, it offered loans for infrastructure. In others, it formed state-backed partnerships or joint ventures. The results were the same: a growing web of interdependence that ensured China remained at the center of global mineral supply. Africa and South America, once considered peripheral in the industrial age, became the front lines of a new geopolitical landscape, where China's foresight and persistence reshaped the balance of power through minerals hidden deep within their lands. Rare earth elements, a group of 17 obscure metals with names unfamiliar to most, have become the invisible force powering the modern world. These minerals are the foundation of technologies that define progress: smartphones, electric vehicles, wind turbines, satellites, and advanced military systems. They are small in volume but vast in importance, irreplaceable in the manufacturing of magnets, semiconductors, and precision instruments. As the world transitions toward renewable energy and digital interconnectedness, rare earths have emerged as the new oil, the critical resource without which the machinery of the future cannot function. And in this new era of elemental power, China has achieved near total dominance, controlling not only the largest share of global production, but also the refining and processing capabilities that make these minerals usable. China's mastery of rare earths did not happen by chance. It began decades ago, when the rest of the world was still unaware of their potential. Recognizing their strategic importance early, China made them a national priority, treating them as more than just commodities. It developed mining infrastructure, invested heavily in refining technologies, and built specialized industries around these materials. By doing so, it gained the expertise and economies of scale that other nations failed to develop. While countries like the United States once held their own rare earth reserves, environmental regulations, high production costs, and a lack of long-term strategy led to the decline of domestic mining, China stepped in to fill the gap, not just producing the materials, but refining